Hey, you got me too, right? Are you running?
Me? No.
I know he's helping me get votes.
I know Maya's running.
Hey, you got both of me, right?
I'm in Mission Factory.
Yeah, I'm campaigning for Homework Fast. You got me, right?
I don't think I get to vote and stuff like that. I should just pretend to be someone else.
I'm trying to make school funner, okay? We need more spirit weeks.
More school weeks.
Spirit weeks. No, like, okay, so you know
Almost
how we have
spirit
like that, you know how we have like those pink out pep rallies and stuff where you have to wear pink like all day? I'm trying to make it to where like exactly. I'm trying to make it to where like whoever has the most pink or looks the best in pink gets the homework pass as a reward.
See, pink is the ugliest color there is.
Okay, but there's also
Brown is brown.
Y'all are saying brown and pink are the what?
Brown is
Mr.
brown.
Brown
That's
has
my
pink
name.
on.
I was roasting
So,
brown.
so you hate what I'm wearing, but
They
my
hate us, they hate
name.
us.
Okay, you can't
Come on,
control
in,
your.
come on. in.
Okay, first of all, pink and brown are for one.
Oh!
I think.
That one episode of.
So you got you, right?
Patrick, I got you.
Nice.
I like that homework idea.
Sweet. Oh, no one wants to vote for the smart person. They want to vote for the masses. They want to vote for
You
someone
have
who's
the
like
worst
them.
ideas. You don't even talk about winter dances.
All you guys gonna need is those notebooks today. It won't be too bad. There's a PowerPoint, but it's mainly videos today.
People want to vote for someone who's like-minded, not the smart people who get 99 letters.
It's literally just who has more
At
flowers.
this point,
Come on in.
Right?
I will give you a Valentine's
I'll give you a spring dance. That's probably make it frozen theme.
He just said it pretty cool. What are you talking about?
I wore it so much when I was young, and so it's like, I hate it now.
Really?
I'm trying to make school more fun, and not get all the teenagers.
I wore like brown
waste their
and
money.
a brown shirt.
Oh, God. We already got wrong, we already got this. We're good with that. We need stress-free weekends, and that's where homework classes come in.
Even
Yes,
for school.
sir.
Yes, sir.
How are you gonna do it then? Tell me exactly how you're gonna.
Okay, so listen, right, so you know how we got like spirit weeks, right, where it's like,
How are you going to convince the teachers to do that?
cause bro,
All
we
right,
already got the
kids.
stress as it is.
Today,
No,
we
vote for me and
are,
I'll make it happen. I don't make false promises.
we end early, I'll let you campaign then.
I don't make false promises, Mr. Brown.
Okay, I got
False
you.
promises,
You got
I
my
like that. Okay, so today we are going to piggyback off the reading and the assignment that you did on Friday on that glorious outside day that we had. It's PowerPoint, but it's mainly just maps, pictures, just points of reference that I want to make in between our video clips. We've got like 4 or 5 video clips that kind of go hand in hand with what you read. And I think between the reading, between the assignments, between our conversations and the video clips, you're going to have a very good understanding of what is going on in Africa between 1200 and 1450, and a little bit before and after for that matter. So that's what we're doing today. Please take some good notes. These notes are going to be the last thing in your notebook check this Friday, okay? And honestly, it doesn't have to be a whole lot. You know, based on the PowerPoint, based on the notes, give me some semblance of note-taking. Show me that you pay attention, you jotted a few things down. If you got that, that should actually be pretty easy. The notebook check is going to be this Friday. I'm going to try to put the link up for you to turn it in maybe tomorrow. That way, if you got it done, you can certainly get it in early. Remember, that is its own daily grade, but it also factors into your final test grade at the end of the 6 weeks, so do a good job. Also, tonight, before midnight, that Safe Building Africa assignment is due. That is what we worked on Friday. I think the majority of you either finished or got really close. Please make sure you actually turn that stuff in. It's too easy to end up getting a 0. So like I said, just kind of pay attention if you want in your notebook. If you would go ahead and write State Building in Africa, and maybe put today's date, it'll help your organization, it'll help me when I'm trying to find all this stuff in your notebook later on. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Now we say 1200 to 1450, but the first thing that I want to address, and it's only briefly mentioned in the book itself, so we do need to expand on it, is something that started thousands of years before our time period, starting all the way back at 3000 BC, 5,000 years ago. It is a phenomenon, an event, a very long-lasting event, known as the Bantu migrations. I would advise writing that down. Bantu migrations, and maybe even kind of knowing the time period was going on. At this point, going back to 30,000 BC, the people south of the Sahara in Africa were largely still kind of tribal in nature. They were still largely surviving off hunting and gathering. The Bantu helped to change this. They are some of the first people to be sedentary south of the Sahara, to grow crops, to be able to kind of sustain a permanent home. For whatever reason, over the course of thousands of years, different groups of Bantu started dispersing throughout the rest of the continent. And they got along with a lot of the people they met, others they didn't and had to fight, but the Bantu had something that nobody else really had, iron tools and weapons, and meant if they did have to fight, they were probably going to win. So this goes on for thousands of years, this Bantu group dispersing throughout Africa south of the Sahara. And inevitably, as they moved, they dispersed their culture. Okay, they dispersed knowledge of agriculture, knowledge of working with iron, using iron for tools and weapons. But they also, dispersed their beliefs. They were animistic, but they also practiced ancestor worship. Probably, though, the longest lasting legacy is their language. All right, you look south of the Sahara today, and guys, there are countless different groups of people, different ethnicities, different languages, but a lot of them, at their foundation, are based, or at least in part based, on the language of Bantu. Swahili is a really good example. Swahili is a Bantu language mixed with Arabic that gets really popular in East Africa and in parts of South Africa. Still really popular to this day. But I guess what I'm saying is you need to think of the Bantu kind of like the Olmec in Mesoamerica. They serve as a foundational group, a foundational civilization that kind of, I don't know, they have a big cultural impact, really still to this day. Again, lots of different types of people in Africa, lots of different cultures, beliefs, you name it. But a lot of the foundation of that does go all the way back to the Bantu migration. And again, we talk about why people in certain geographic areas adhere to certain religions or speak certain languages, especially if they're religions and languages that did not originate there. Guys, it's history. It's years and years of trade and travel and warfare and colonization. And that kind of explains, those culture traits that we see popular in certain regions to this day. One of the main areas that the Bantu settled in was here in Eastern Africa, an area that also had an Arab influence from the Middle East. Swahili mixes those. Speaking of Arabic, prior to this time period, you did have the Arab Muslim conquest of the Middle East and much of North Africa especially. To this day, most people in North Africa are of Arabic descent and they speak Arabic. Again, there's history. One of the things we said brought an end to the Abbasid Caliphate in Dar al-Islam was them being displaced by these different groups of Turks that had migrated into the region and established empires of their own, like the Seljuks, or eventually we'll talk about the Ottomans. So Turkic starts to spread into the region. Today, you have Turkey named after this broad group of people. Again, you want to know why people speak what they speak, believe what they believe, do what they do. I mean, a lot of it does have a historical answer. Now, this map was actually part of the assignment. And there wasn't anything to do with it. I just wanted you to look at it that way you kind of know who we were talking about, what area they were in. And we're not going to spend a whole great deal of time on most of them, but I at least want you to familiarize yourself with these different groups and know that they were active in Africa during this time period, and that all of them, to some extent, really greatly benefited because of trade, interconnectivity. especially areas that trade routes just naturally funnel through. They can tax the traders that come through, but they also get exposed to so many new products, so many new ideas. Sometimes they also have an avenue to sell a lot of stuff that maybe they have. So lots of different groups in West Africa. You read about Ghana. I think they maybe mentioned Songhai. The one that we're going to mention the most today is going to be Mali. Again, a lot of trans-Saharan trade just naturally funneled through this region, because trans-Saharan trade was really all about connecting West Africa to North Africa. And that trade city of Timbuktu really served a very important function. The Hausa, their neighbors, also got pretty wealthy, did pretty well for themselves because of where the trade routes naturally funneled through. The Hausa, what I'd write down about them, rather than like Mali or Great Zimbabwe, they're not like a kingdom or an empire where one person's in charge. It's not a centralized government. They're more like the Maya. They're a group of city-states that culturally are connected, but politically are largely independent. To the east, and we're not going to get into them yet. We will talk about them later, but there is one thing I want you to write down: Ethiopia. Okay, at times also known as Abyssinia. They kind of stand out because during this time period, North Africa is predominantly Muslim. South of the Sahara, you've got all sorts of indigenous beliefs. But Ethiopia, very early on, well before this time period, they were Christian. So remember that Christianity is strong in Ethiopia. That is something that's going to come up at a later date. You've got your trans-Saharan trade up here in the north. You've got Indian Ocean trade here in the east. Great Zimbabwe will become fabulously wealthy off of their trade connections to the eastern coast. You also have what we call the Swahili coast or the Swahili city-states. Again, independent city-states based really all around trade that politically rule themselves, but economically very much connected and culturally very much connected, at the very least, with their use of the Swahili language. Map's a little bit more detailed, and it just serves the purpose of, guys, when we talk about a few different groups of people in an area, don't ever think they're the only ones there. There's all sorts of people. Okay? History is so broad, and there's so many civilizations, so many individuals that, people that write this curriculum, they got to choose who they believe are the most important, who made maybe the most historical impact or gained the most fame during their time. But just for reference, Ghana, Songhai, Mali, pretty much the same territory. There's a lot of overlap there. Of course, they ruled at different times. Timbuktu will serve as a main city for all of them. You got your Hausa kingdoms or city-states. You've got Abyssinia, Ethiopia, the Swahili coast, Great Zimbabwe. I think that was pretty much it. To introduce you to kind of Africa south of the Sahara, we've got our first video clip. Now this one is from United Streaming. It's a little bit older, but I like it because it does give you a good sense of geography, but it also kind of explains the cultural and racial makeup that you see in Africa still. I mean, the Sahara is this huge division. Does anybody know what Sahara translates to? Desert. It is Arabic for desert. So don't call it the Sahara Desert, because then you're just saying it's the desert, which is kind of weird. And it's Arabic because in the north, that's what most people are. Arabic as a language is spoken widely. Arabic as, kind of an ethnic group, is the most widespread. You get that huge division of the Sahara, and then south of the Sahara, you have multiple Black African societies, all with unique cultures of their own, but some things like Bantu type foundations that kind of unite them to some extent as well. And again, this video does a good job of that, and it also gives you just kind of a glimpse into some of the places that we're going to talk about in a little bit more detail. So I'm gonna have to unshare for just a minute or two. This video is online. I think it says Sub-Saharan Survey or something like that. Sorry, I'm talking to the people online. You guys probably think I'm crazy. All right, so let's watch this real quick. This one we're going to watch using my computer because I couldn't really get it to work on the Promethean board. But, yeah, it's pretty good. I like it. Hopefully you'll like it too. Whoops, got to change the sound. See, technology. Hate it, but, you know, it's whatever. I don't hate it. I like technology. But it always does something kind of weird, at least to me.
Africa is the second largest continent. With more than a fifth of the world's land area, it's a place of great variety. Africa has high plateaus, lush rainforests, rolling grasslands, tall mountains, deep valleys, and harsh deserts. Africa is home to the world's largest desert, the Sahara. This huge expanse of sand and rock forms a divide between the terrain and the people of Africa. Arabs and Berbers live to the north, while the region south of the desert is home to many ethnic groups of Africans with different cultures, languages, and religions. Along the southern edge of the Sahara, the desert gives way to a broad savanna of grasslands dotted with trees. Great herds of animals, such as elephants and zebras, have roamed the savanna for thousands of years. Two of Africa's greatest kingdoms grew up in West Africa south of the Sahara, along the Niger River in the modern country of Mali. The first of these great trading empires was Ghana. It was founded around AD 300 by a people called the Soninka. They may have been the first West Africans to make iron. Their iron tools and weapons gave them an advantage over other groups in West Africa, whom they conquered to create a strong state, the Kingdom of Ghana. The kings of Ghana built their power on the trade of two key products, gold and salt. Gold was the basis of currency in most parts of the world, and West Africa had lots of it. So Arab and Berber traders from North Africa were willing to risk crossing the Sahara to trade with West Africa. In turn, the West Africans needed salt, which came from mines in the desert. A thriving gold and salt trade developed. Ghana, at the center of the caravan routes, grew rich by taxing the traders and created a great empire. The traders brought more than just salt and other goods. They brought a new religion, Islam. The kings of Ghana welcomed traders, but they didn't adopt their religion. Instead, they allowed traders to establish their own Muslim trading towns. But around 1050, an extreme Muslim religious movement arose among the desert Arabs. Its followers, called Almoravids, waged war on all non-Muslims. In 1076, they swept into Ghana, capturing its capital and forcing the people of Ghana to convert to Islam or be killed. Almoravid control over Ghana lasted only about 10 years, but the empire never recovered. A new empire soon grew up along the Niger River. A young prince of the Mandinka people, related to the Soninka, took control of the former capital of Ghana in 1235 and established the Empire of Mali. The people of Mali recaptured the gold-producing areas and brought back a profitable trade in gold and salt. Like Ghana before it, Mali became rich, powerful, and the envy of other African nations. Mali's territory expanded north and west of the Atlantic Ocean. By the 14th century, Mali reached its height of power, covering an area about the size of Western Europe. But unlike those in Ghana's empire, the people of Mali accepted Islam. This shared religion gave Mali closer ties to the Muslim cities of North Africa. And as Mali expanded its empire, it helped spread Islam. Cities like Timbuktu, Gao, and Janneh show signs of the impressive mosques and Islamic learning centers built during Mali's rule. When Mali finally weakened, another empire arose. Centered in the city of Gao, the Songhai Empire also encouraged the spread of Islam across West Africa. The lasting impact of these empires can still be seen today. Millions still speak the languages of Mali and Songhai. Many traditional West African songs, dances, and stories have been passed down for centuries. The marketplaces, first used by gold and salt traders, still bustle with activity. And Islam still lives in these areas, alongside traditional African religions.
So again, you know, the legacy of these, whoa, hey, these West African empires, I mean, they're still there. We're going to focus mainly on Mali, but do know that, you know, Ghana, Songhai, Mali, same basic area. And what really allowed them to thrive is trade routes funneling through there. Just like the Abbasid Caliphate, later we'll get into the Byzantine. If you've got trade routes funneling through your territory, especially if you have what they're after, there's a lot of money to be made from that. But even if they just funnel through, you can tax the traders. You can get some of their stuff. I mean, that's very valuable. Timbuktu. Definitely need to have that city down because really of all three of those empires, it's a thriving trade city. This is obviously of the Mali Empire, and they were the widest spread all the way to the coastline among the three. But really throughout, you know, trans-Saharan trade, the same sort of stuff is traded. Now, it should be noted, you go back several hundred years before this, you know, even prior to the 600, say, I don't know, maybe even 1,000 years ago. 1,000 years before we are, so 1,200, it's like 200. Guys, trans-Saharan trade, it evolved over time. And really what was absolutely necessary in order for it to really thrive wasn't so much horses, it was camels. Guys, camels do not come from Africa. They're not indigenous to Africa. They come from the Middle East. So early on, Arab merchants brought camels because they could kind of take the desert heat much better due to their ability to retain water. And it's not until the camel gets really widespread that this trade network is really up and running. Well, by the time we get to the year 1200, man, it is flourishing. And the people at the center of it are getting filthy rich. Now, there's all sorts of stuff that was going back and forth. Copper and beads and ivory and slaves. We'll get into slavery. Terrible, but that was happening. But what were the two main commodities that they kept saying over and over and over and over? Gold and salt. Please write those down. Trans-Saharan trade equals gold and salt. That's not all there was. I mean, they even had cola nuts, which was one of the original ingredients in Coca-Cola, like a caffeine source, you know, from this weird nut. But gold and salt is really what allowed these kingdoms to flourish. They had a lot of gold, you know, that's self-explanatory, but salt, guys, salt, extremely valuable. I know, you're like, I got a lot of salt, I'm not rich. Well, obviously less so now, but you got to understand, especially in the world at this time, salt was a necessity, okay? Short of just seasoning your food, you could preserve your food with salt because salt dries out the moisture, and you want that, especially before the days of refrigeration. But even more importantly, guys, we all need salt to survive. When you sweat, you're losing that sodium, you know, and hopefully you replenish it throughout the day. That's one of the things that causes you to get dehydrated. Guys, this is out in the Sahara. Dehydration is a problem. Water is scarce. So salt, especially in this region, is a huge and very, very valuable resource. Again, Timbuktu is just kind of at the center of it. And, you know, even though there were many emperors and empires in this area, it's really the Malian Empire that has the most notoriety. And a lot of that comes from one guy, Mansa Musa. I wrote down his name, Mansa Musa. He's the guy, I believe, that had this mosque built that's still in Timbuktu to this day. Mansa Musa is very important, very famous, mainly because he's probably the richest person in human history.
Oh, that guy.
Yeah, that guy. Okay, estimates vary, but I've seen some estimates as high as $400 billion compared to, you know, what it would be in today's money. Jeff Bezos, I think, is the richest today. I looked this morning, I think he's like at 134 billion or something. So that's obviously incredibly wealthy, but man, Mansa Musa was rich. So our next video is all about Mansa Musa. And it's not just his wealth he's known for. He definitely spread the Islamic faith. He definitely built up Timbuktu. But he's famous, to this day for being so rich. But he was famous worldwide to some extent, even in Europe, which at that point had very little understanding or knowledge of Africa itself. So let's watch our next video on Mansa Musa. That's pretty good. Where's it? Oh, there it is. Yeah, today's mainly videos with a little bit of narration in between.
If someone asked you who the richest people in history were, who would you name? Perhaps a billionaire banker or a corporate mogul like Bill Gates or John D. Rockefeller. How about African King Musa Kita I? Ruling the Mali Empire in the 14th century CE, Mansa Musa, or the King of Kings, amassed a fortune that possibly made him one of the wealthiest people who ever lived. But his vast wealth was only one piece of his rich legacy. When Mansa Musa came to power in 1312, much of Europe was racked by famine and civil wars. But many African kingdoms and the Islamic world were flourishing, and Mansa Musa played a great role in bringing the fruits of this flourishing to his own realm. By strategically annexing the city of Timbuktu and re-establishing power over the city of Gao, he gained control over important trade routes between the Mediterranean and the West African coast, continuing a period of expansion which dramatically increased Mali's size. The territory of the Mali Empire was rich in natural resources, such as gold and salt. The world first witnessed the extent of Mansa Musa's wealth in 1324, when he took his pilgrimage to Mecca. Not one to travel on a budget, he brought a caravan stretching as far as the eye could see. Accounts of this journey are mostly based on an oral testimony and differing written records, so it's difficult to determine the exact details. But what most agree on is the extravagant scale of the excursion. Chroniclers describe an entourage of tens of thousands of soldiers, civilians, and slaves, 500 heralds bearing gold staffs and dressed in fine silks, and many camels and horses bearing an abundance of gold bars. Stopping in cities such as Cairo, Mansa Musa is said to have spent massive quantities of gold, giving to the poor, buying souvenirs, and even having mosques built along the way. In fact, his spending may have destabilized the regional economy, causing mass inflation. This journey reportedly took over a year, and by the time Mansa Musa returned, tales of his amazing wealth had spread to the ports of the Mediterranean. Mali and its king were elevated to near legendary status, cemented by their inclusion on the 1375 Catalan Atlas. One of the most important world maps of medieval Europe, it depicted the king holding a scepter and a gleaming gold nugget. Mansa Musa put his empire and himself on the map. But material riches weren't the king's only concern. As a devout Muslim, he took a particular interest in Timbuktu, already a center of religion and learning prior to its annexation. Upon returning from his pilgrimage, he had the great Djinguereber Mosque built there with the help of an Andalusian architect. He also established a major university, further elevating the city's reputation and attracting scholars and students from all over the Islamic world. Under Mansa Musa, the empire became urbanized, with schools and mosques in hundreds of densely populated towns. The king's rich legacy persisted for generations, and to this day, there are mausoleums, libraries, and mosques that stand as a testament to this golden age of Mali's history.
And again, it kind of goes back to that theme in the Islamic world, especially at this time, of kind of, focusing on art and architecture and education. And, he certainly helped do that, in the city of Timbuktu. Now this I just found to be interesting, and I think it's more thought-provoking than anything. This is a primary source, from the time period. There's this Al-Amari. He's an Arab Egyptian scholar. He's sitting down, he's talking to this famous leader, Mansa Musa. And Mansa Musa tells a story about his predecessor, the guy who was in charge before him. I think it was his uncle. And I just want you to think about how the world would look differently, would be different, had this mission been successful. And again, this is in the 1300s, just to give you some context. So Abu Bakr equipped 200 ships filled with men and the same number equipped with gold, water, and provisions, enough to last them for years. They departed, and a long time passed before anyone came back. Then one ship returned, and we asked the captain what news they had brought. He said, "Yes, O Sultan, we traveled for a long time until there appeared in the open sea a river with a powerful current. The other ships went on ahead, but when they reached that place, they did not return, and no more was seen of them. As for me, I went about it once and did not enter the river." The Sultan got ready 2,000 ships, 1,000 for himself and the men whom he took with him, and 1,000 for water and provisions. He left me to deputize for him and embarked on the Atlantic Ocean with his men. That was the last we saw and all those that were with him. And so I became king in my own right. Guys, they're talking about sailing across the Atlantic. Now just imagine if the Malian Empire had gotten to the Americas about 100 years before Europeans ever even thought of it, ever got here by accident. I mean, would they have been the ones to conquer and colonize? Would they have done different things? Who knows? That's what I mean, you know? The world would be different, you know? It would look different. It's just, it's amazing how these little instances in history, they can change everything. Yes?
Maybe there are like 2,200 ships in both somewhere in the sea.
Maybe. Again,
So we could.
couple things here. First of all, you gotta look at the source. Maybe they're exaggerating, maybe. But then again, you know, Mali, they got the wealth. They could pay for this if they really wanted to. It's just, you know, again, you can't just take it all for granted. This could be all made, or it could be very much true. Again, it's just kind of interesting how those little circumstances can change the trajectory of world history, because we do know that later on, you know, the Europeans, the Spanish, the Portuguese, they're going to be the ones that first, you know, get to the New World and they colonize, and then other European countries follow suit, and eventually European countries over the next several years are going to kind of dominate the globe for many years, really, leading up to the world wars. So again, you know, the world, I don't know, we could have went in a completely different direction in history. Which is kind of, it's interesting to think about. We're now going to look further to the south. We're going to look at the kingdom, the trade city of Great Zimbabwe, known for their stone architecture, which was very rare in this region at the time. Years later, what do you know, Europeans come in and conquer and colonize for a while. They find the structures there, and because they were very, very racist, they said, oh, Africans couldn't have built this themselves. Yeah, obviously they did. Our next video, we'll go over Great Zimbabwe, talk about why it was such a special place, but also get into the controversy around who actually built it. Once that's done, we just got a little bit left for the day, so let's get to it. Great Zimbabwe. It's another TED video. I like these. Short, sweet, informative, good stuff.
Stretched across a tree-peppered expanse in southern Africa lies the magnificent ruins of Great Zimbabwe, a medieval stone city of astounding wealth and prestige. Located in the present-day country of Zimbabwe, it's the site of the largest known settlement ruins in sub-Saharan Africa, second on the continent only to the pyramids of Egypt. But the history of this city is shrouded in controversy, defined by decades of dispute about who built it and why. Its name comes from the Shona word Madzimbabwe, meaning big house of stone, for its unscalable stone walls that reach heights of nearly 10 meters and run for a length of about 250 meters. For its grandeur and historical significance, it was named a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1986. Back in the 14th and 15th centuries, it was a thriving city. Spread spread across nearly 8 square kilometers, Great Zimbabwe was defined by 3 main areas: the hill complex, where the king lived, the great enclosure, reserved for members of the royal family, and the valley complex, where regular citizens lived. Rulers were both powerful economic and religious leaders for the region. At its highest point, the city had a bustling urban population of 18,000 people and was one of the major African trade centers at the time. What enabled this growth was Great Zimbabwe's influential role in an intercontinental trade network. Connected to several key city-states along the East African Swahili coast, it was part of the larger Indian Ocean trade routes. The city generated its riches by controlling the sources and trade of the most prized items: gold, ivory, and copper. With this mercantile power, it was able to extend its sphere of influence across continents, fostering a strong Arab and Indian trader presence throughout its zenith. Archaeologists have since pieced together the details of this history through artifacts discovered on site. There were pottery shards and glassworks from Asia, as well as coins minted in the coastal trading city of Kilwa Kisiwani, over 1,500 miles away. They also found soapstone bird figures, which are thought to represent each of the city's rulers. And young calf bones, only unearthed near the royal residence, show how the diet of the elite differed from the general population. These clues have also led to theories about the city's decline. By the mid-15th century, the buildings at Great Zimbabwe were almost all that remained. Archaeological evidence points to overcrowding and sanitation issues as the cause, compounded by soil depletion triggered by overuse. Eventually, as crops withered and conditions in the city worsened, the population of Great Zimbabwe is thought to have dispersed and formed the nearby Mutapa and Torwa states. Centuries later, a new phase of Great Zimbabwe's influence began to play out in the political realm, as people debated who had built the famous city of stone. During the European colonization of Africa, racist colonial officials claimed the ruins couldn't be of African origin. So, without a detailed written record on hand, they instead relied on myths to explain the magnificence of Great Zimbabwe. Some claimed it proved the Bible of the Queen of Sheba, who lived in a city of riches. Others argued it was built by the ancient Greeks. Then, in the early 20th century, after extensive excavation at the site, the archaeologist David Randall McIver presented clear evidence that Great Zimbabwe was built by indigenous peoples. Yet, at the time, the country's white minority colonial government sought to discredit this theory because it challenged the legitimacy of their rule. In fact, the government actively encouraged historians to produce accounts that disputed the city's African origins. Over time, however, an overwhelming body of evidence mounted, identifying Great Zimbabwe as an African city built by Africans. During the 1960s and 70s, Great Zimbabwe became an important symbol for the African nationalist movement that was spreading across the continent. Today, the ruins at Great Zimbabwe, alluded to on the Zimbabwean flag by a soapstone bird, still stand as a source of national pride and cultural value.
Cool. Now to talk about something that's not cool. And I hate to close on this, but it's, in history we do talk about a lot of amazing things and cool accomplishments and just interesting stuff. Then sometimes we got to talk about things that are incredibly morbid and just evil in nature. And what we need to talk about is slavery. Now, as you read yesterday, various forms of slavery had existed in Africa for as long as we can remember. But we were usually talking about debt bondage or prisoner of war type scenario. Chattel slavery, where people were considered actual physical property, it was relatively rare. Now, we're all familiar with the transatlantic slave trade that we'll see in the 1600s, that unfortunately the United States was involved in. But long before that, there was an Indian Ocean slave trade, sometimes nicknamed the Arab slave trade because it was primarily facilitated by Arab Muslims, really targeting populations here in Eastern Africa. While numerically maybe as damage damaging as the transatlantic slave trade. This actually went on a lot longer. It's pretty shocking when you think about it, because it's something a lot of people don't know about. But just like during the transatlantic slave trade, enslaved Africans were forced to, go across the Atlantic and go to places in the Americas to serve as slave labor. Well, here it was places, using the Indian Ocean, Middle East, India, even as far as China. So our last video today goes into, in great detail, the evils that were the Indian Ocean slave trade network. And this one's really good. It is hard to watch because, these are human beings. But again, we gotta look with the bad and the good sides. So one more. This one's about 8 minutes, so we'll just be done after this.
We in the
But you
diaspora
do need
think
to
about
know.
the slave trade. We tend to think about the Atlantic slave trade. But today, I wanted to bring our attention to an event that also disrupted African history, an event that some may even consider much worse. What up, African world? It's Home Team here, and I'm back at it with another video of African history, culture, and worldview. And as always, if you want access to sources, courses, exclusive videos, or if you simply want to support the Home Team, you can do so on patreon.com. The link is in the description box below. The Arab slave trade began when the Arabs first invaded North Africa in the 7th century. The Arabs' first entry point into North Africa was, of course, Egypt. The general Amir Ibn al-As invaded Egypt in December 639 with a humble force of 4,000 men. According to the sources, these men belonged to the Arab tribe of Ak and partly to the tribe of Kafik. The troops also included some new converts of Roman and Persian soldiers. Ironically, the Muslim Caliph Omar, after allowing his general to leave to conquer Egypt, was having second thoughts, because he thought they surely couldn't conquer Egypt with a measly 4,000 men. So he wrote a letter to General Amir. If you receive this letter when you have already crossed into Egypt, then you may proceed. Allah will help you, and I will also send reinforcements as may be needed. The Arab general crossed into Egypt, received the letter, and proceeded to conquer the country. This was merely the beginning and the origin of the sweep across North Africa and the Arab invasion. The Arabs would then go on to conquer the Byzantium territories of Tunisia and Western Libya, an area the Arabs themselves called Afriqiya. From their base in North Africa, early Arab rulers such as Aqba bin Nafi would impose a tribute of 360 slaves on whatever region he controlled. This tradition, of course, continued to develop and rapidly expanded into a much larger demand. To keep up with this demand, slaves had to be taken from further south, places like Mali, Senegal, Chad, and even northern Nigeria. After slavery was firmly established and very profitable, it became a sort of free-for-all for the Arab Berber Muslims. The 12th century Jewish traveler Benjamin of Tudela recorded that Arab slavers used to take wheat, raisins, and figs to the Western Sudan, spread them across the ground near suitable settlements, and then seized and enslaved unsuspecting Africans as they came looking to purchase or inquire. This method was rare, but it just goes to show the lengths that Arabs would go to profit from the booming slave trade in North Africa. Large numbers of Africans were sent north, generally to serve as domestic servants or slave concubines. It's been estimated that from the 10th.
And I just want to stop because you're going to hear this word moving forward. It's horrible. A concubine is essentially a sex slave. But yeah, unfortunately, we're going to hear about that.
To the 19th century, some 6,000 to 7,000 slaves were transported north each year. The journey across the desert was, of course, absolutely brutal, and many Africans perished along the way. According to Henry Hamilton Johnston, who was a British explorer, he claims in his book that many slaves would be able to just reach the drinking place and then would sink down and die before the water reached their lips. Another primary source of slaves for the Arab world was on the eastern coast of Africa. This is where enslaved Africans known as the Zanj were in high demand. In general, enslaved African people were used for agriculture, labor, household help, or to be concubines or soldiers. The first direct evidence of a sizable Indian Ocean slave trade was when large numbers of East African male slaves labored on the plantations of the Abbasid Caliphate in Mesopotamia. Slaves exported by Arab traders to Southwest Asia, India, Indonesia, and China worked mainly as soldiers, concubines, and household servants. The expanse of the Arab slave trade was far-reaching. In fact, a 7th century Chinese text mentions ambassadors from Java presenting the Chinese emperor with 2 Sang Chi, or Zans slaves, as gifts in 614. And 8th and 9th century chronicles mention Sang Chi enslaved Africans reaching China from the Hindu kingdom. These traders captured Bantu peoples largely from the interior of present-day Kenya, Mozambique, and Tanzania. Large slave markets developed in Zanzibar and Pemba, where at the height of the trade, as many as 15,000 to 20,000 slaves passed through annually. The slave trade became so significant that in 1840, the Sultan of Oman moved his seat of power to Zanzibar. In the East African interior, people such as the Mwezi, Ngoni, Yao, and Makua raided neighboring communities and sold their captives to Arab caravans, often in exchange for firearms. In addition to the many East African slaves sent to the distant shores of Arabia and the Persian Gulf, others remained as laborers on Arab plantations in East Africa, such as the Omani clove farms in Zanzibar. The Arab slave trade was absolutely devastating to African people. It was a trauma akin to the Atlantic slave trade. I'm not going to play oppression Olympics between the Atlantic slave trade and the Arab slave trade, but I'll simply say this. The Arab slave trade was at least 700 years before the Atlantic slave trade, was no less dehumanizing or horrific, and on top of that, it lasted much longer. One example of the shockingly dehumanizing character of the Arab slave trade comes from a British traveler to East Africa named David Livingstone. David Livingstone was a traveling British physician and Christian missionary in East Africa. He became very popular for his journey into Africa and writing on his experience. His first-hand eyewitness account of the Arab slave trade really increased his knowledge across the world. What he witnessed seems to have a great impact on him in a very disturbing way, and he makes it very clear how he felt about it. To overdraw its evils is a simple impossibility. We passed the slave woman shot or stabbed through the body and lying on the path. Onlookers said an Arab who passed early that morning had done it in anger at losing the price he had given for her because she was unable to walk any longer. We passed a woman tied by the neck to a tree and dead. We came upon a man dead from starvation. The strangest disease I have seen in this country seems really to be brokenheartedness, and it attacks free men who have been captured and made slaves. Livingstone estimated that 80,000 Africans died each year before even reaching the slave markets of Zanzibar. All the horrors of the Atlantic slave trade can be found in the Arab slave trade. For whatever reason, the Atlantic slave trade is simply more popular. Some historians assert that as many as 17 million people were sold into slavery on the coast of the Indian Ocean, the Middle East, and North Africa, and approximately 5 million enslaved Africans were transported by Muslim slave traders via the Red Sea, Indian Ocean, and Sahara Desert to other parts of the world between 1500 and 1900. This history is important for us in the diaspora to understand. The report about Africans being enslaved in Libya is simply following a tradition that has survived since the 7th century. It is our job as Afro-descended people to be the light bearers for the dissemination of this knowledge. This history, so unacknowledged or simply underrepresented in the African and Arab world, is unfortunate because the terrors perpetuated upon these Africans should be remembered and never forgotten. Well, I'm all out.
That's what I was looking
for. Like these videos.
And it's slavery. It's one of the more evil, maybe the most evil institution in human history. Yet you see it throughout human history, and it's all really evil. I mean, people may come up with other justifications, racist ideas. And even later on, we'll get into some scientific racism that's developed. And that is, you know, one of the justifications in hate, but it's greed. It's about exploitation. It's about making money off of people against their will. More on that later. We'll unfortunately talk quite a bit about slavery as we move forward. It never goes away. Tomorrow, I've got like one more slide to go over with you. It's about this guy named Ibn Battuta that was referenced in your reading, one of history's greatest travelers. We'll do a little bit on him, and then we will start getting into our last geographic region for the Global Tapestry Unit, Europe. We'll see what's going on there in the Middle Ages and kind of moving into somewhat more modern times. Remember, your state building in Africa assignment is going to be due tonight before midnight, so if you haven't done that, please get it done. It won't take you long, and we are having another notebook check this Friday. Other than that, we got a couple minutes. Y'all just hang loose.